Gentlemen, so exciting today. We have Mark Leibler. He is partner at Arnold Block Leibler. Very exciting. There is a new book about him called The Power Broker, which is a really interesting look at Australian business world, political landscape, but also a very fascinating individual in terms of his exposure and his influence throughout Australia and also Israel. So tell me a bit about your involvement with Mark over the years.
So obviously in our community, Mark's quite a hero and a leader in our Jewish community here in Melbourne, but he also spreads across every business circle, almost every political circle. I just finished reading his book only last night, actually. It talks about his interaction with every single prime minister in Australia for the last, 20, 30 years. And he's played a massive role in assisting the Indigenous community here in Australia as well. So his leadership is not limited to his community or his own company, ABL, but it's across anywhere that needs a sense of direction. You find that Mark Leibler's jumped in and kind of drove those agendas, communities, businesses in the direction that they needed to be. And his sense of leadership and clear direction is incredibly inspiring. I am very, very honored and privileged to be able to be here for this interview. I've put on a suit and tie, as you can see. I even tried giving myself a haircut, but
it worked well.
we are very, very privileged and excited to be here. And this is a whole new area of lead the way we're going to. So it's a little bit pivoting from property to just general leadership. Mark's focus is on tax. He's one of Australia's most prominent tax lawyers with a global reputation as well. So a lot of questions are going to be around how to maintain culture when everyone's working from home. When is ABL going to be encouraging their staff to come back in? Mark's seen a lot of ups and a lot of downs in his very long and impressive career. What does this current market tell him? How does he feel about it? What's the planning and what's the opportunities in it?
Yeah, I'm really fascinated to hear as to how leadership works during a crisis. And we have been hearing a lot from different leaders in the property industry, also political as well. So it will be fascinating to hear, based on Mark's experience, also his interactions with so many leaders around the world, as to who he sees as handling this well, and also personally how he's handling it himself.
Good morning, Mark. Thank you very much for coming on to Lead the Way for this interview. We're very grateful and privileged to have you on. Thank you. Over your impressive career as a lawyer in Australia, you've seen some pretty big ups and downs across different markets. What's your personal feel of the current market conditions we're in today?
It's very difficult to assess the resiliency or otherwise of the current market, because we don't know how long it's going to take for us to emerge from the impact of this virus, and we don't even know when or if a cure or a vaccine is going to be validated. But the one thing that I think that I've learned over the years, and I don't think it's changed now, is if you're going to invest in sectors and companies that you understand. I mean, that's critically important. And back people who, well, I guess you trust and believe that you might have an understanding of the areas of expertise that you lack. Now, I think it's also critically important to focus on the fundamentals. Take a long-term view. Short-termism is counterproductive, and everyone needs to understand no one's going to be able to pick the top or the bottom of the market. It doesn't matter what area you're involved in.
One thing that people are really looking out for at the moment is strong leadership. So obviously you yourself are a leader in the community, also in the business world, but you've also been very exposed to political leaders, a lot of business leaders. So what's in your opinion, what are the characteristics of a good leader? And can are you born with it, or is it something you think that people can learn?
It's a difficult question, but I think that most things can be learned, provided you've got the basic ingredients: intelligence, education, and commitment. Though true leadership comes more naturally for some rather than others. That's a fact of life, and we all know it. It involves leading by example, leading in a manner that inspires others to follow, rather than being coaxed, dominated, or forced. I think the most critical quality of a good leader is good judgment. And that's something you can't learn from a textbook. You learn good judgment, in a sense, by way of osmosis, through experience, by surrounding yourself with people who demonstrate the leadership qualities that you admire and that you aspire to. And by the way, it's not a question simply of being someone else's clone. You have to be yourself, but you can emulate the qualities you admire and you can make them your own.
On that issue with political leaders, onto political leaders, I mean, at the moment we are seeing quite significant differences in the way that political leaders across the world are handling the pandemic and also the subsequent economic fallout. Who do you think is handling it the best?
Well, I guess it depends a little bit on how you look at it and from what perspective. Today, my number one vote would go to Gladys Berejiklian. I mean, New South Wales, under her leadership, has managed to suppress the virus without destroying the economy. I guess in terms of the immediate impact of the health crisis, I also have to nominate Jacinda Ardern as maybe number two, and Scott Morrison as a close third. Who knows, perhaps followed by Taiwan's president. By way of contrast, because I happen to have family there, I point to court cases like Israel, number one in terms of the proportionate spread of virus infections. And it shows you what happens when politics takes over and health considerations are fundamentally ignored. Look, I think, by way of general comment, I think it's too early to say which leader has handled the crisis best. We need to see how different countries come out of the other end in order to assess not only how they've handled the health crisis, but also how they've handled economic and social change. It is a very delicate balancing act, and you've got to find the right balance. That's not easy.
Culture is such a critical thing within any organization, and ABL has a very proud, clear, and famous culture. How have you managed to maintain that culture with everyone working remotely?
Well, the partnership at Arnold Bloch Leibler includes multiple strong personalities, lots of egos, but what we have in common, and I think what we've maintained over the firm's long history, are some essential values. Excellent service to our clients has always come first. Creative problem solving and not being too greedy. We've never pursued growth for its own sake. Though I must say our commitment and our capacity to promote young lawyers into the partnership and to empower the next generation of leaders means growing the pie. Growing the pie. We give people autonomy very early in their careers. with close support from partners. You know, it's an unusual feature of the firm, and it suits most young lawyers, but not all of them. Those who respond absolutely thrive, in my view, and we've seen that over the years. Look, another fundamental is using the law as an instrument to improve social justice. This is something which is understood and respected by the clients of the firm, and it undoubtedly attracts the best and the brightest young lawyers to Arnold Bloch Leibler. And our public interest practice involves lawyers right across the firm, and it's widely recognised, I believe, as really the best in Australia. Our legal practice, I'd like to emphasise, is based on a great deal more than financial metrics. Values are important. Giving back to society is important.
On that issue of giving back to society, community service is something that you have been very passionate about and obviously become very well known for. How have you managed to build ABL, manage a family, you know, do all these things in your career and also give so much back to the community?
Well, for a start, I've never distinguished between these different aspects of my life. And the firm doesn't distinguish between these aspects of our work. They're critically intertwined. You know, for example, my first interactions with John Howard and Paul Keating were on tax matters, but I subsequently dealt with both of them on issues of concern to the Jewish community. My dealings with Julia Gillard were related both to matters of concern to the Jewish community and Indigenous issues. So, I don't know, part of it is, I guess, I've managed to cope by needing less sleep than most people.
Sleep's overrated.
Can I ask how many hours a night do you sleep at your prime?
Probably not more than 4 to 5. I mean, look, the reality is, I would get back from, I would find it very difficult to actually think things through at the office. There were too many phone calls, too many disturbances, too many people wandering in and out of my office. But when I got home, after dinner, it would be relatively quiet, and that would really give me time to actually do the difficult thinking work. So that doesn't leave too much time for sleeping, particularly when you take into account, particularly in years gone by, I was also involved in many communal meetings, and it just took a lot of time, but I really don't regret it.
Over your long career, what's the one deal that you're most proud of?
Well, there's a couple which sort of stand out for me, but I think the number one deal is the effort we put into what's become known as Project Do It, a sort of amnesty scheme that encouraged Australians with large amounts of money put away in overseas banks to bring the money back to Australia. Now, the decision obviously to go with the scheme was ultimately that of the Commissioner of Taxation, Chris Jordan. But I did spend a bit of time with him and advise him on the approach. And I guess in a sense, it was particularly special for me because Project Do It relieved years of guilt and worry for Holocaust survivors and their families, many of them who happened to be clients of the firm, who really had no choice but to abandon funds overseas when they fled to Australia. Yeah. The other matter that I must say I'm particularly proud of is the return of the copyright into the lifetime works of Albert Namatjira, Australia's most iconic Aboriginal artist. That was really something. 34 years after the Northern Territory government sold the copyright to a commercial gallery, it was returned to our client, the Namatjira Legacy Trust, which is managed by the artist's descendants alongside independent trustees. The significance of the matter and how it reflected the broader injustice and disrespect of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, what they faced in the past and they still face today, it sort of screamed for our attention, which of course we provided pro bono.
The Project Do It, there's one or two chapters that talk about it in the book, your Unauthorized Biography, but I must say it's like a business thriller. It was a real page turner. The stories and the characters and the familiar concepts that the book goes through in quite good detail.
Well, it sort of reminded me of things that had sort of receded to the back of my mind, and so look, this was not an authorised biography, which means that I had no control over what the author Michael Gawenda put in his book, but I spent hours and I obviously did cooperate with it. I don't think you could have written a biography like that without cooperation from the subject. So I spent hours and hours with him, going back to my early childhood, and it surprised me some of the things I couldn't remember, and with a bit of prompting, some of the things that I did remember. And one of the things had I written an autobiography, it probably would have gone to 2,000 pages, would have been as boring as hell. One of the things that someone looking objectively at me and my life story can do is somehow or other pull out the relevant parts in order to convert it into a narrative which, hopefully some people will find interesting. I think Michael did a pretty good job overall. That's not to say that I agree with all the value judgments or that I would have included everything that he included, or that I wouldn't have left some parts out. But that's the difference. A story generally, a biography, is generally more interesting when it's viewed through the eyes of others rather than the subject, him or herself.
What stuck out for me was the extent that you went to for your clients. Like, you lobby the ATO on behalf of clients, you lobby prime ministers on behalf of clients. And for someone in my age and stage of career, it was incredibly inspiring to see that you do whatever you can to give you the best possible service to your customers. And that was clear throughout the entire book.
Well, I think that's right. And of course, what you can't see in the book, because there are issues of confidentiality as between lawyers and their clients, which have to be preserved. But notwithstanding that, there were some fascinating incidents which, for those reasons, can't be recorded in the book, and which sort of sprung to mind as I continued with these interviews between myself and Michael Gawenda. And also, one of the things, I spent almost 2 weeks going through my private papers, because whilst we had an arrangement between us that, you know, issues which were not available to the public, he couldn't use my private papers without my consent. But even with that restriction, I couldn't allow clients' papers, which were privileged, to remain in that collection. So I spent a couple of weeks of my holidays doing nothing else but going through these, my compactus systems. There were, God knows, look, I'm a little bit obsessive about paperwork. I find it very, very difficult to throw anything out. So, well, which in a sense is a good thing, but the mountains of paper do pile up after a while.
It would have been handy when you're going through this book, your compulsive paper.
Yes, well, precisely. No, it was. Yeah. It definitely was. I used to keep press clippings, all sorts of things, mountains and mountains of them. But so, you know, Michael Gawenda, who wrote the biography, had his work cut out for him.
And also a lot of material to work with, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the difficulties, I think, which he had, which I would have had in his position, was deciding what to put in and what to leave out, bearing in mind that you want to produce a book that was, you know, readable.
He did that successfully.
One of the things about you is that you are obviously incredibly social and like being around people. So how have you been handling working from home and having limited contact with a lot of people in person?
Well, hasn't been easy. Look, I believe we're social animals, frankly, and all my senses tell me that there'll be more opportunity for those who want or need to work from home to do so. But I think others, and I think the bulk of the people, will want to be in offices, will need to be in offices, will want to have that contact, that opportunity for having exchanges of views, for bumping into people in the corridors. We need the social contact, but, you know, people also, they collaborate more effectively and innovate better, exchange ideas, share culture when they're working together in the same space. That's what I absolutely believe. So, you know, it'll be a little bit different because of, you know, the coronavirus. And it all depends when and if, you know, the cure or the vaccine comes. But asking me, I believe in the future of offices.
So are you encouraging your staff to get back to the office as soon as it's as soon as it's safe to do so?
Yeah, and we're not forcing anyone to, but yes, I mean, I believe that eventually we're all going to be back working in our offices. Frankly, I can't wait to get back. I mean, you know what I find working from home is, you know, I'm very busy, less busier than I was beforehand. But because you're not getting that sort of change and you're not getting that social interaction, and, you know, you're not going out in the evenings, the weekends tend to roll into each other.
Yeah.
In other words, you finished a weekend and you're already into the next one. And I find that very, you know, frankly, destabilizing. but you know, we're coping. Worse things have happened.
Correct.
Yeah, that's right.
In relation to the code of conduct that the government put into place between landlords and tenants, do you feel that it's been fair for both sides of the fence? And if you were the one drafting this code of conduct, what would you have done differently?
So, can I just say that I need to be a little bit careful here because, my firm and I, we act for clients who are major tenants and also substantial landlords. So there's a limit to the extent to which I'm prepared to buy into this. But look, I think there is a conversation. There's a conversation to be had in relation to how rent is constructed. And I think that was a conversation that was already beginning before this virus descended upon us. And there may well be change, but I think what's critical, if there's going to be change, it's got to be something which is mutually economically acceptable to both landlord and tenant. And I think that's going to be, I don't want to preempt what that might be, that's going to take a little bit of time to work through. And, it's not going to be easy. But offices are not disappearing. Shopping malls, I don't believe, are going to be disappearing. There will be more online retail trade, but that's something that we've seen to be developing, in recent years in any event. But it will, I think, be accelerated by the experience of so many during this pandemic.
What's the one piece of advice that you would give young professionals starting out in their career? I think a lot of people would be looking to you as, you've had this great career, great involvement, community, political environment. And what's your, is there one piece of advice that you can offer, or a range of different ideas?
Well, there's not simply one piece, but there are three top tips, in my view, that I would offer. I mean, firstly, and I guess for lawyers in particular, you've got to find the balance. But I think this applies across the board. You've got to find the balance between being a specialist and a generalist. I mean, at our firm, we consider, we talk of ourselves as being general specialists, although all of us have specific areas of expertise. I mean, like I do in tax, for example. But we ensure that we're sufficiently well-rounded to advise our clients on whatever issue they bring to us, or at least to identify the issues and refer the client to a partner with the relevant expertise. I mean, this is critically important, because if you over-specialise, you can miss critical issues altogether. That is the challenge, to be able to identify the relevant issues, because once you've done that, you'll always find within the firm those who've got the expertise to deal with them. But if you don't identify the issue, you'll end up in trouble, and your client will end up in trouble too. So that's the first point. But for young professionals more broadly, I'd say it's important to back yourself. Very important to back yourself. And surround yourself with people that you look up to. But always be your own person, and never, ever, ever compromise your own personal values and integrity. And I guess finally, commit to lifelong learning, because there's always more to know.
That's
great advice.
Mark, what do you see as the biggest opportunities in the next 12 months here in Melbourne?
Well, can I just say to begin with that I really don't think that 12 months is the right time frame. I think we need at least a 5-year horizon at the very least. And again, in terms of business opportunities, my advice would be against short-termism and to plan ahead carefully. You know what? Plans can change as circumstances change, but they're very useful. I found from experience, having plans is very useful. Now, the more you plan ahead in accordance with the sort of fundamentals, rather than relying on short-term rewards and luck, well, my experience is that the more you're likely to succeed. And I think you need to look to mentors, people who've been through various economic cycles, and learn from them. And I hope that there's an opportunity for enhanced bipartisanship, not necessarily on everything, but on some things, including areas of much needed economic reform that party politics and the Senate in particular have held back for decades. I'd also like to see true bipartisan support for the Uluru Statement from the Heart and its call for constitutional recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians. And I also hope for continued sustained bipartisan support for Israel, which has been demonstrated by nearly all Australian governments and oppositions since the State of Israel was established.
Mark, thank you so much for participating in Lead the Way. Your advice and insights are incredible and very valuable to many people who will get to hear this. We wish you and your family and your firm a Shana Tova and a happy Jewish New Year. And hopefully next year will be a little bit more free and relaxed than this year's been.
Thank you, Zalman, and the same to you.